All right, boys and girls, so now we're going to be moving into our angles, and I know that in 4th grade you did a very big study on your angles, so I'm going to make this kind of quick because we have a couple of pages that are related to the angles. So the angles that you talked about in 4th grade would be the acute, the right, obtuse, and straight. And if you need time to write any of this down, I'm going too fast, you just need to pause the video and copy it down. One thing that you want to remember is that angles are named by their vertex. So that vertex would be where the two rays are meeting. And the symbols are faster than writing words. So two symbols that we want to be familiar with would be this degree sign that looks like a little circle that's kind of floating in midair. And then the symbol for the angle, which looks like, I think you're going to have to add it to your book. It looks like a little L or a less than sign that is just kind of in the air, kind of hanging in the air. And so if we're thinking about acute, we're thinking about that tiny little angle. When we measure it, it is less than 90 degrees. And we can name angles in isolation by one letter. So we name them by their vertex if they're in isolation. So this could be angle A. If I put a point here and I make that my vertex and I call it B, we can call this angle B. And remember, our right angle is going to have that 90-degree measure with a protractor. A protractor is a tool that you use for measuring angles. And so it's not 91, it's not 89, but it's exactly 90 degrees. And then finally we have obtuse, which would be those that are larger than 90 degrees. And again, I have created a point here, a vertex, and I'm referring to this angle as X, so you know what I'm talking about. All right, so if you don't have all of that written down, go ahead and pause your video, get that copied. And I'm going to go ahead and flip to the next page. So when we talk about specifically angles, not only do we talk about angles like when we're measuring angles, but sometimes we're going to see angles in triangles. And in 5th grade, we do a very intensive study on triangles, and we learn that every triangle will have two names. So the first angle that we're going to concentrate on would be the acute angle. Acute angles measure less than 90 degrees, and they look like a cute little angle and like a piece of pie. And so again, I have created my little vertex here, and I have labeled this less than 90 just to remind me. And we're talking about this as angle A. Now, one thing I want to report back to, or go back and touch on, is we can name angles by one letter when they're in isolation, meaning when they're standing alone. But if the angles are inside of a plane where there are lots of points, then we want to use three letters. 3 letters equals an angle name. So for instance, if I was talking about angle B, I would need to be very specific because B has all kinds of angles around it. So one angle that I could talk about would be MBO. And I really encourage my students, as you are naming the angle, to trace it with your fingers. So to name an angle with 3 letters, we're going to put the little angle sign, and we're going to talk about MBO. So that would be this piece right here. That's an acute angle. If I wanted to talk about another angle that happens to have B as its vertex, I'm going to make that angle sign, and I could say OBC, OBC. And this angle right here is an obtuse angle. Obtuse angle. I could continue and I could talk about angle CBA, CBA, this angle here, and that is also an acute angle. And then one more angle that B is involved in would be ABM. ABM. So one thing I hope that you're noticing is that the vertex is always that center letter, because the center is the angle that we're looking at. So just making sure that you're using those 3 letters to name an angle when it is not in isolation. Going back to my pages, I also have acute angles in this triangle, so we're going to call this an acute triangle. And continuing to move forward in my booklet, we have a right angle, and right angles measure exactly 90 degrees. And so here we have 2 examples. We have the right angle, and I'm going to go ahead and put some line in pieces on the end of that. I'm going to go ahead and make a vertex right here. I'm going to call this vertex Z. So I could call this angle Z. And because it's in isolation, again, it's all by itself. And then we also see angles in triangles. So because this triangle has a right angle inside of it, we would call it a right triangle. So one thing I want you to start thinking about is remembering that when we are naming triangles, we name them by their largest angle. So if the largest angle that we see is a right angle, then we're going to call it a right triangle. So very quickly, I'm going to put some endpoints, some vertex here on the end, and I'm going to call this triangle A, B, C, and I am going to label this. So the angle that is right would be A, B, C, because it's angle B that has the right angle. All right, and now I'll just move over to our next page. This would be page 7, I believe. And we're talking about obtuse angles. So an obtuse angle measures more than 90 degrees, and they look more like your beach chair. I love these angles. Okay, so if I'm thinking about this, I can, add my little legs. This is like my reclining beach chair. I'm going to go ahead and add my little arrows for to show that this can continue on, and I'm also going to add a point here for my vertex. Let's call this angle angle T. Because it is in isolation, it's all by itself, we can refer to it as angle T. And then when we go over here to our triangle, we can see that we have an obtuse angle right here. So just so we get that practice, I'm going to add some endpoints on each place where we have connections being made and intersecting lines. And I'm going to call this S, T, P. And if I wanted to talk about the obtuse angle, angle T, I could name it S, T, P, because T is where we have the obtuse angle. And then finally, let's move on over to our last angle. I believe this is going to be page 8. And we have our straight angles. So straight angles measure exactly 180 degrees, and they look like a straight line. So this would be an example of your straight angle. So not a whole lot to say about that, except that is what it is called. Okay, so make sure you have that information. I'm going to go ahead and jot 180 degrees because a straight line is made of 2 90-degree angles put together. And once you have that written down, then you have been caught up on all of your angle information.